got a question. What is a watershed? And to be honest with you, I had to look it up to find out. And a watershed, from what I read, was an area of land that drains surface water into streams, lakes, presses, etc. And that everyone, whether they're close to a large body of water or not, are actually in a watershed. Watersheds are vital to sustaining life. They feed bodies of water that supply our drinking water, water for agriculture, manufacturing, and recreation. They serve as natural habitats for various animals and plants. So it is critical that we protect our watersheds and keep them clean and healthy. A well-functioning watershed, easy for you to say, watershed slows, cleans, filters, and stores water by allowing it to absorb into the ground. And this process improves water quality and reduces risks of flooding. But what about our watershed? How healthy is it? San Miguel's watershed, the Alto Rio Lala, is the largest in the state of Guanajuato. And today we're going to hear just how healthy it is and why we should worry about our watershed. I'd like to welcome our speakers today. First of all, we welcome back April Gatos. She is president of Audubon de Mexico. And what I didn't know, she was a former director of the Urban Watershed Institute in Portland, Oregon. Then we have Agustin Madrigal. He is the director and co-founder of Salvemos Real Lela. He has worked on restoration and conservation in our watersheds for nearly 30 years. April and Agustin will describe the condition of our watershed and the work they are doing to conserve and restore it. Thank you for joining us today, and I believe April is first up. Take it away, April.
I want to thank everyone with Rotary and everyone that's online today for coming to hear about, well, I guess for your concern about our watersheds, and that's why you're here to listen to this presentation. And the condition of our watershed is worrisome. But the message that we're trying to convey today is that we still have time and know-how on how to restore it to health. And we feel it's really important for us to share this message and people to know how a watershed functions and how we are all connected through our need for water and one another. So some of this information is, and I just, I want to go through some information that I am calling Watershed 101. And then Augustine and I will talk about some of the pathways to a more resilient water future. Unlike the political or social boundaries that we are used to, watersheds are ecological boundaries that promote life by capturing water. Every drop of rain that falls is delivered to us courtesy of our watershed. Early people, sorry, I have to be coordinated here. Early people settled in our watershed for obvious reasons, and one of the main reasons was because there was abundant surface water to meet their needs. As our population and our economies grew and our lifestyles and technologies changed, demand for water has grown as well. At the same time that our demand for water is going up, we began to destroy the very ecosystems and processes that sustain our water resources. The primary role of a watershed is to capture water and direct it to the lowest point in the watershed through a network of streams and rivers. In a healthy watershed, some of the water that falls on the land will infiltrate into the soil, and some of that water eventually ends up in an aquifer. Everyone lives in a watershed. Even if we lived in the Sahara Desert, we would be within the boundaries of a watershed. But how many people think of themselves as being a resident of the watershed? If we begin to look at our watershed as our home, we can begin to recognize how its ecological systems function, understand how our activities affect the land, water, and people and wildlife of a region, and better prepare ourselves for a changing climate, and the possibility of our wells running dry. This map shows the major watersheds of the world, but within each major watershed are smaller sub-watersheds. We live in a sub-watershed, and within our sub-watershed, there are even smaller watersheds. Each watershed contributes water to a larger watershed, which may feed a larger watershed yet, and so on until the water reaches the ocean or terminates in an inland body of water. Let me show you how this works by looking at our own watershed. Our watershed, the Alto Rio Laja, located in the upper right-hand corner of this map, is part of the larger Lerma-Chapala watershed. If we, as I'm talking, trace the blue line which represents the Rio Laja coming through our watershed and heading south and then over to Lake Chapala. All the water within our watershed that is not infiltrated by the land or captured in private cisterns or reservoirs flows into the Lerma River near Salamanca, which flows into Lake Chapala, Mexico's largest and most important lake. The Lerma-Chapala watershed is extremely important to Mexico and its people and its economy. Agriculture and industrial production within this watershed represents a large percentage of our GNP. But these enterprises also come with a need for water, a great need for water, as does the large population of Guadalajara, which supplies more than 2 million residents with water from Lake Chapala. What this means to us living in the Alto Rio Laja watershed is that nearly all of the water that flows in our rivers is allocated for industries and people below our watershed. Surface waters are owned by the nation and regulated by the federal government, and they decide who gets to use it. Which means that when we get all excited to see our Presa Allende filling up with water, we should be happy for the fishermen and the kayakers and the birds and other wildlife who benefit from this water, but we should not allow ourselves to think that we are water rich in any way, because it's not our water to use as we want. And we're also part of a larger watershed system, the Lerma Santiago watershed, which empties out to the Pacific Ocean in the state of Nayarit. Visually, this map helps us to understand how watersheds link people and economies across great distances. We are all connected through our water. But what affects life and water in our region the most, and what we have most control over, is our own watershed. Our watershed encompasses 1.6 million acres of land governed by 9 municipalities. It is shaped by the 3 forces: our surrounding mountains, which form the watershed's boundaries, and soils. Several mountain ranges surround our watershed, creating almost a cup-shaped area which captures a lot of rainwater. These mountains are mainly volcanic rock, which influences how much water we can capture in our soils and how well we can infiltrate water into our aquifer. When it rains, water flows down the mountains, entering small streams, which meet up with larger streams, traveling through farmland, cities, rural communities, and picking up all kinds of inputs along the way. Finally, the water enters the lowest points in our watershed, the Rio Laja and the Presa Allende, before exiting our watershed at the Presa Allende Dam. Something to keep in mind is that our mountains are the source of Laja, its tributaries. In the big watershed picture, our watershed generates water. As you can see from this graph, well, first of all, I need to point out that climate is a very important factor to our watershed.
Classical lady.
Oh, okay. She's your friend?
Yeah. You want to like their page too?
What is that? Climate is a factor, informing our watershed. And as you can see from this graph, our state is a water-stressed region due to our semi-arid climate and our watershed management practices, primarily poor water quality and groundwater depletion. Climate change is not factored into this index, but we are now finding that rainfall is not as predictable as it once was, and the patterns of our rain are changing. Our weather is becoming more erratic, marked by heavy downpours over short periods of time, followed by weeks of no rain, rather than rainfall more evenly distributed over a period of time. As an example, last fall, Presso went from 15% of its capacity to flood state within the month of September. These heavy downpours take a terrible toll on our soils and rivers. Our soils are critically important to our watershed. They keep water where it falls and allow it to infiltrate into the ground rather than running off into our streams or evaporating into the air.
Ice.
Careless management of our local lands has created conditions of extreme vegetation and soil loss throughout our watershed that is causing desertification in many areas, and it is a growing problem. Desertification, in the simplest terms, means that the soil can no longer catch the rain. Some of the practices that affect our soil are allowing livestock to overgraze the land, unsustainable industrial practices, industrial farming practices, burning of our lands, which not only affects the air, but it affects our soils too. And then there's urbanization. All of these contribute to the compaction of our soils, so they shed water like concrete, remove vegetation, makes our soils vulnerable to erosion by wind and rain, and destroying organic material to the point that soil is no longer porous and able to absorb water. Urbanization is a growing problem in our region. I'll get to that a little bit later today, but what is essentially happening is that it replaces natural open space with roads and rooftops that cannot absorb water, enlarging the magnitude of stormwater and runoff that causes soil loss in adjacent areas, harmful flooding, and the transfer of soil and pollutants into our waterways, which affects our water quality. But we can't talk about the watershed without talking about our water resources, rainfall, rivers, and our aquifer. Our surface waters greatly contribute ecological value to our watershed. They get water out of the watershed to prevent flooding, and they provide critical habitats to support the web of life. And although these waters belong to the federal government, our rivers still provide a lifeline of water for bathing, washing clothes, fishing, and irrigating fields for many rural people. River bottoms are also areas of natural infiltration that feed our aquifer. Unfortunately, our rivers are barely functioning as ecological systems today because of land management practices. This is a common theme that are causing them great harm. These lovely pictures. The upper right is a sand and gravel extraction site on the Rio Laja River. And all throughout our watershed, our rivers are being used as roads and crossings for traffic, cars and trucks. Livestock grazing and the cutting of our trees and the riparian or the vegetation areas that are adjacent to our rivers are other problems, and flooding. All these contribute to the degradation of our rivers' health, destroying our riverbanks, causing soil erosion and loss of streamside vegetation that cools the water and prevents algae and bacteria growth, intercepts fertilizers and pesticide runoff, and captures water that is then slowly released into the streams, thereby controlling flooding and water levels and protecting habitats for aquatic birds and other wildlife. Water quality is a long-standing problem throughout the world, but it's necessary to support for aquatic life and to protect the health of the people who use the river's water. Livestock watering, fertilizer and pesticide runoff, untreated wastewater inputs throughout our watershed, and sediments from erosion are all negatively affecting the quality of the water in our river by introducing nutrients into the water. These nutrients encourage the growth of algae and bacteria and plants that rob the oxygen from the water. Another issue that affects water quality is plastic trash and other trash as well, like tires and you name it, entering our streams by either plastic never degrades, and once it enters our waterways, it will never ever go away, leaching harmful toxin as it degrades into tiny particles and being consumed by aquatic animals and bird life that at times leads to their death. And our wonderful Presa Allende, where everything in our watershed ends up. It is the visible and invisible testimony of how well we are taking care of our watershed and surface waters. The brown color of the water is mostly due to the soil that is eroded from the land. The green is in the water is massive quantities of hyacinth that have been introduced into our presa. And at this very moment, that thrives on nutrients from our untreated wastewater and manure deposited into our rivers and the fertilizers that flow off the land. Its presence is a very real threat to our fish and other aquatic life and the birds that feed upon them and the fishermen that depend on the fisheries for their livelihood. And this is the water that we are sending downstream to water the food crops that people and animals consume, and to all the people and wildlife along the line who depend upon it. What we do to the watershed, we do to ourselves and all the creatures who depend upon it. And on that, I want to move on to groundwater. And I know that most everyone here knows about our problems with over extraction of the groundwater and the concentrations of heavy metals in our water that are toxic to human life. So what I want to do today is focus on the recharge of our aquifer. Excuse me. In a well-functioning watershed, some of the water that is held by our rivers and streams and that falls on the surface of the land percolates into the ground and makes its way into the aquifer. This is a process that takes millions and in the best of circumstances, and that's how long it took for our aquifer to form over time. But in order to recharge the aquifer, we have to have healthy soils, and our soils have been damaged to the point where they hold very little water and they are not porous enough to rapidly draw the water in before it can be evaporated. And if the water does manage to penetrate our soils, they enter this subsurface that is volcanic rock that's very dense and very difficult for the water to find its path down into the aquifer. There are a few places where large fractures in the rock have occurred, where more rapid replenishment can take place, and that's the good news. The bad news is that even if we create conditions that encourage infiltration into our soils, it will take thousands of years to replenish our water in the aquifer, which means that there is no chance of improving the quantity of water in our aquifer in our lifetimes, perhaps hundreds of lifetimes. And isn't that jolly news? And just to recap, we're currently seeing torrential rains and changes to our land that erode our soils, create harmful floods, and carry soil and toxins into the presa, and our aquifer has been hijacked by agricultural interests to the point where it can no longer be considered a reliable resource. So what's to worry about? But more importantly, what can we do? And it's very simple. We can catch the rain. By improving our soils and returning natural vegetation to our lands, we have opportunities to make ourselves a water-rich area. In other words, we need to engage in new practices that enable us to catch the rain. And we get there by conducting projects, capture the rain, and provide opportunity to regenerate our soils and plant life. and involve local people who become educated and trained in how to do this work and why, and in the process become more deeply connected to the watershed and the land and the water that sustains them. My colleague and friend, Agustin Madrigal, the director of Salvemos Arriolaha, has been doing exactly this for many years, and he will now tell you about this work. Agustin?
Gracias. Thank you. Thank you, April. As April explained in a very good way, all the situations that belongs inside a cuenca watershed. We have been working since a long time ago, around 20 years, in trying to restore this land. Our project, it's been something that we have worked for so many years, and mainly we are working in different municipalities. And as you can see in the map, we have been working in Dolores and Guanajuato mountain range, in all those places for so long. In 2002, we have a very important project with North American wetlands, and we participate in restoring the land in different rivers in the northeast and the northwest sides of this watershed. Yes, please, the next one. All this kind of job of work is necessary to have an assessment and a technician. We have technician. We work together in environmental assessment, and we work very close with the different communities we have been working since so long. For example, in the picture at the right hand, this is a work that we have been doing since 2011. Those are terraces that has been worked by the people of the community, the inhabitants, the ejidatarios. And it's really important to understand that all this kind of work requires a lot of social work. Before we began working, as I explained, we have different meetings with the community, and we work in the places where they consider is necessary. But of course, we need to make some kind of management plan to define the different strategies we need to apply, because each one of the different places we work are, of course, are different. The conditions of the rivers, the conditions of the arroyos, the conditions of the soil. And in the left picture, you can see two guys working in doing trenches. This work mainly is to stop erosion and to create conditions for infiltrations to the subsoil. Before we make reforestation, we make this kind of work in order we can guarantee that the reforestation will survive for the next months. Next, please. And everybody is included in this work. The same woman and men, the same young or not so young, all the people wants to participate. And the good thing for this is also that they receive a payment for this, pago de jornales. In each one of the different projects we get involved, we receive the support for different financial support. For example, in the one that is on the left hand is in Loma Dimas, the municipality gives the support, and a private company give also a matching fund for this kind of work. In the right-hand picture, we have some meetings. We also, at the same time, this is part of our staff. We're showing the monitoring birds, the monitoring wildlife. So at the same time we do these kind of things, we try to get involved in how are the conditions, because the habitat health is really important to be protected for wildlife and of course for birds. And we as Mexico, we have some agreements, international agreements with the states and Canada that we need to preserve, and we need to restore these habitats for the migratory birds. Next one, please. We have trenches. This is some kind of the kind of work we are doing for infiltrating water. In the trenches, we take out the soil, but we cover with the same rocks we have in the places. And this, the idea is, as I explained already, is to have infiltration. We know if we don't do this before having a reforestation, we need to planify to make the plan before having this, because if we don't do this kind of work, the trees that we are going to reforest is really difficult that they could survive. Next one, please. Those are terraces, and the idea, of course, is to stop the erosion, to stop the sediment. This is in the hillsides mainly, and all the places have conditions that requires a specific. For example, this place has been overgrazed, has a lot of fires in the past, and actually it's a place that has been restored for around 10 years, and we can see a lot of changes. We can see that the deers that used to live here now again are here because the kind of conditions we have now, the people decided, the ejidatarios decided to fence the place. And this is really important in order to take out the livestock at least for 3 years, and then try to rotate the livestock if it's necessary. Next one, please. And the work we made also in arroyos, in the rivers, maybe in this picture is a little bit difficult to see where is the dam, but well, we have some rock dam, one rock dam here in the arroyos, and this is the same idea. We construct this kind of rock dam all along the river, all along the arroyos, in order to stop the energy of the river, to stop the carry sediments, and to create conditions where the wildlife could drink water. Next, please.
That's me. Okay, thank you, Augustine. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No. I think maybe at the end will be some questions. Thank you. Gracias.
Great. Well, Salvemos primarily works in the rural areas. Audubon is working in our urban lands. And I wanted to draw attention to some recent changes brought about by our 2040 urban plan, and where we had 2,800 or so hectares devoted, 28,000, 100 hectares devoted for urban growth boundary. In 2040, we anticipate that we're going to triple the amount of our urban growth area. That is going to have a huge impact on our watershed if it does take place. Just briefly again, the issues in the urban area is the loss of open space and native vegetation to intercept and infiltrate water and provide wild habitat. Impenetrable surfaces like rooftops and roads, increasing flooding and increased pollution entering streams and riverbank erosion. Increased waste treatment entering into our streams and waterways. fragmented wildlife corridors and destruction of habitat altogether, traffic congestion, air pollution, loss of cultural identity. So some of the programs that we're looking at or that we're working on is one of our main focuses on trees, especially our native trees. We're so important to our environment and the health of our water. What they do is protect our soils. Their cover and leaves protect our soils by capturing the rain and then just letting it slowly trickle down into the soil. They provide shade for our soil, and they also provide many other benefits, including air quality and carbon capture. So we've kind of adopted Parque Allende to clean the native trees there. There's somewhere around 1,500 trees in the 30 acres of land that's in the 90% of them need attention, and about 70% of them are in critically suffering from parasitic plants and plague, which is paisley, that suffocates the tree and prevents it from transfer evaporation, which how it gets its food and nutrients to survive. So we're by hand. We have a great team of volunteers and always welcome more people to join us who come out 2 days a month at this point in time to clean the trees and remove the paisley and get them pruned up so that they can be restored to good health and live a good long, many period of time. We're also working on promoting green infrastructure in the city. Green infrastructure is a way to manage stormwater naturally through vegetated wetlands and small stormwater retention ponds like this. At Parque Juarez, we have 3 examples of rain gardens that integrate plants with a shallow basin to intercept the water, and that from going into our creeks and carrying the pollutants with it. Through this process, we can also filter the pollutants down deeper into the soil. The examples of Parque Juarez are not exactly placed in the right way, but we wanted to provide a way for people to kind of come and see and understand how these things work. Our Habitat Garden is a demonstration project at Parque Juarez. This provides habitat for our pollinators, and it's an education garden as well with signage, interpretive signage throughout. In a watershed, everything's connected, and so providing habitat in the city helps to join habitat in the exterior of our city as well. And we engage in shoreline cleanups through our Amigos de la Presa program, who organizes these usually on a monthly basis, but because the water's been so high in the Presa, we have no shoreline. So they've done a lot of great work and keeping our shorelines and our waterways free of plastic and other trash. Augustine, do you want to talk about our collaborations?
Yes, thank you, April. Yes, we have different programs, different projects with different agencies and different NGOs. In this case, we have a training project with the Willamette in Oregon. Since 2015, we have been working together in environmental education with kids, relating the situation of the birds, the migratory birds. And we spend time in the schools, in rural communities. We are working in Agustin Gonzalez, in Cabras, and in Peñalta, in San Franco, at the north side and at the north part of the Cuenca, in Municipio San Diego La Unión. And Audubon also is working in 3 schools, in 3 urban schools. The kind of activities we develop and we share with the other kids in the Willamette in Oregon are knowing each other through the birds that migrate and sending the kids here send letters to the kids over there, and they maintain an exchange and talks about the environmental conditions in both regions in North America and here in Mexico. Next one, please. And we also are involved with Adaptur, many of the NGOs here in Miguel, project of the German agency known as GAZ. They have a project that is related with climate change conditions in tourism. And we participate since 2018 in different exchange actions. And also we are part of the Agua Vida SMA coalition that incorporates different NGOs of the states. Unfortunately, pandemia, we stopped a little bit about this work, but we have been working in some projects related mainly with the water.
Yeah, with the Agua Vida, which Augustine was one of the people responsible for forming this or network, as we're calling ourselves. There's been some interesting outcomes. We've had a lot of meetings with government about watershed management that frankly haven't gone anywhere, even with at the federal level. But and a couple years ago, some members of our group got together and developed recommendations for how to capture, for requiring the capture of like up to 30% of stormwater on private properties, retaining it on site, so to help to prevent with flooding and all the associated problems with flooding. Unfortunately, this was when they were doing their 2040 update and updating their construction codes, and it wasn't accepted. But we're going to keep on trying because it's an important tool for managing stormwater. And that's about all we have, other than time for questions.
I think we only have just a couple of minutes for questions. April and Augustine, I want to thank both of you for taking the time. I know you put a lot into it. Anybody have any questions? Please, please speak up if anybody has any questions. No.
Not a one?
Not one question out there?
Well, what about the water hyacinth?
Wow, you must have.
What about the water hyacinth in the
what?
Presa? The water hyacinth in the Presa. Has anybody noticed it or wondering what's going on? I mean, this is a really serious problem that we have right now. And it represents all the problems in the watershed. So in a sense, it helps us to kind of wrap our head around about how healthy is our watershed. But what's been happening now is, well, first of all, the hyacinth can double in mass in 15 days. And with all the heat from the sun and the nutrients in the water, it's likely to happen. The city has been, the Department of Ecology has been reaching out to the federal government and state government for assistance with this problem, but there has been no offer of any real support. They hired fishermen and their families to come in and try to remove this plant life by hand using pitchforks.
Mm-hmm.
Provided them tools to do that, but that is a very slow process, and there's no way that they're going to be able to remove the quantity and the enlarging quantity of this. So there's we're in talks with the city, but I don't know really what their plan is for Plan B. I think they're trying to research what needs to be done. My understanding is that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when this took place in the past, they used chemicals to kill the plant. And that is.
Yeah, but you don't want to use chemicals now.
No,
No.
no, no.
So
what-
we got to figure it out, and it may take the whole community coming together to make it happen.
Right. From Joe Ruffino, he wants to know how someone can be a volunteer for cleanups.
Well, get on our mailing list. Audubon,
And how do you do that?
you get a hold of us at audubondemexico@gmail.com.
And Tom Schneider asked the question, is it realistic to capture some of the rain that falls in San Miguel to use for human consumption other than a cistern? Which probably would be, what are you thinking, Tom? Like a reservoir? What?
Are you speaking about?
Well,
San
they've talked about having, major thing or water flowing to major areas to create a new reservoir, up by the Presidencia and have it fall down into be used along the way rather than just running down into the Presa. I mean, politicians have mentioned this as being one of the possible solutions to doubling the size of San Miguel in the next, year or 5 years or whatever it is they're
But
planning.
how would that help us? Because it's not our water to use. Are you saying that the federal government would allocate rights to that water to treat for household use?
I don't know that it's, I guess it would be sort of like making, what's it, the making somehow a capture system there that could be used in other ways. I don't think anybody has it figured out. I'm just trying to figure out if it was realistic or whether it's just politic talk.
Okay, listen, folks, we're gonna have to we're gonna have to wrap it up there. We've gone past time, and April, I want to thank you and Augustine for it's Augustine, right? Did I get that right?
Yes,
For
yes.
joining us today.